Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's Inside APSAD webinar, our final webinar for 2023. So thank you for many of you for hanging in with us and joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we're all meeting today, where we all work, where we all live, and to pay deep respects to the traditional owners. Here in Brisbane, Miagin, we're on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and we extend that acknowledgement to the lands upon which you're all meeting today as well. And also acknowledge and recognise the elders and the significant wisdom, gratitude, and resilience that they continue to display in their stewardships. So today I have the very pleasant task of introducing, for those who may not have come to meet both Matt Tipping and Brett Hodges, who joined us here with the support of the Mental Health, Alcohol and Other Drug branch of Queensland Health, joined us here in January this year in the Insight team as our dedicated and designated AOD lived experience educators. So that journey, some of that you'll hear today, will be one that I hope you get to share in through this webinar, and particularly on the topic that we're talking about today, which is the lived and living experience workforce, and covering off on some of those frequently avoided questions, because it's certainly a growing field, a growing area, and an incredibly important one. So Brett, with his background in social sciences and working in the field for 20 years, particularly with a harm reduction focus, brings an incredible amount of experience to share with us today. And along with Matt, who also has a significant background across many fields, but more recently working in peer work in acute mental health inpatient wards. So all of that experience, well, you'll benefit from it today. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over and just finally to say that in terms of any questions, comments, or feedback that you'd like to provide, you have the option of doing that in the chat today, and we'll come back at towards the end of the presentation, about 10 or 15 minutes before the end, and put those to both Brett and Matt for their responses. So thank you again.
Thanks, James. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming out there in the internet world. I think I also would like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land from which we meet on here today, the Yagara and the Turrbal peoples. I'd also extend that to the lands and custodians from where you might be watching this today. We pay our respects to the elders of the past, from today and into the future. I'd also like to recognise today the many people with lived living experience, including those family members and allies who have had to endure the stigma that still surrounds substance use, mental health challenges and suicidality. Importantly, we also want to recognise the efforts of those that have come before us, those that have worked valiantly, sometimes against entrenched systems, to enable the voices of AOD, lived living experience, to be heard in forums such as this one here today. It's really important that we do that and think about the process. I didn't want to say journey today, but here I am about to say the word journey. We started, and look, there's many people to thank for this, but Matt and I came in on January, and we've come into Insight, and it's difficult to talk about what we've done with Insight, but I started thinking about words, and I guess it's easy to look at it and think about, well, from the very beginning, we were given the freedom and also respected, in our opinion, to co-design and co-develop workshops, e-learnings, resources. We co-review we're part of this review process. Insight has an extensive collection of learning materials. And as a review process, we were embraced in this, included from the very start. We've also had to co-deliver. And so we're now co-delivering workshops with Insight amongst a multidisciplinary team of advanced clinical educators across the state. There's a lot of co-words involved here. And I think to myself, what's co about? And I thought, let's get back to collaborate. What's happening here at Insight is shaping up as this best practice example of where the perspectives and understandings from an AOD lived and living experience are woven through an organisation's activities. What this opportunity has done is reinforced in me the importance and benefits associated with this really authentic collaboration in producing high quality, really relevant and informed training materials. This collaboration has gone further than what happens here in Insight. It's another part of this journey. Oh, I've said it again. This collaboration is extended to the wider community, recognising that we're only two voices bringing our own experiences. Throughout this, we've actively sought to engage with the networks of those with alcohol and other drug lived living experience, seeking their input around the content and direction of the projects that we work on. We do this informally every day. We talk and share amongst these networks, though we needed to formalise it around a couple of these projects, particularly an e-learning that we created early on in the piece and an organisational readiness toolkit that we're working on at the moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to Matt, and Matt's going to talk to you a little bit about how we formalised this collaborative and consultation process.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks everybody for joining us. So my name's Matt, one of the AOD Lived Experience Educators working alongside Brett here at Insight. Suppose I better click the button. Cool. So before I started, obviously we use the word alcohol and drug lived living experience a lot in this presentation, but from this point on, we're just going to use the acronym AOD LLE in place of that, just to. It gets really tongue-tiring saying alcohol and drug lived living experience all the time. So when Brett and I first commenced in the role of AOD educators with Insight, our objective was to raise awareness and an understanding of exactly what is the AOD lived living experience workforce. So to do this, we embarked on an extensive literature review to understand the challenges and successes of integrating the AOD LLE workforce, not just here in Australia, but worldwide. We then reached out to our existing networks of AOD LLE colleagues, as well as a newly identified network of workers and colleagues as well, and management within organisations. And that formed our consultation process. So our consultation group consisted of 21 participants across 13 organisations. It's important to mention that almost half of the consultation participants were in designated AOD LLE positions. And those roles ranged from AOD peer workers to harm reduction peer workers and lived experience advisors. We also really needed to understand the challenges and successes at a local level that come with the inclusion of the AOD LLE workforce, and therefore we found it important to speak to managers, coordinators, exec level management of organisations that currently employ the AOD LLE workers or are considering engaging with them or with this workforce. So through the collaborative process that Brett was just talking about, we were able to develop our e-learning, which is entitled Understanding the AOD Lived Living Experience Peer Workforce. Should be a QR code that you'll see on your screen right now. If you haven't already completed that or even had a look at that e-learning, we just encourage as many people as they can to jump on. Just scan that QR code if you'd like. And go through the e-learning, give us feedback. We love a bit of feedback. What you'll find in this e-learning is examples of the workforce in action, benefits of including the designated AOD LLE roles, and also some considerations for organisations for the successful integration of the workforce. Throughout that consultation process, we discovered that a lot of organisations had questions around role descriptions and training and recruitment, We also discovered that many of the organisations we came across had challenges not only just including the AOD living experience workforce, but also retaining and keeping them safe within their work environment. So that sort of sparked the next phase of our Insight Lived Experience project, which was to design a organisational readiness tool. So, all right. So at this phase of the consultation, we saw us engage another 21 participants across another 12 organisations. The participants in this round were both designated and non-designated roles and ranged from team leaders, managers and executives. I guess our aim was to co-design a toolkit that builds and enhances organisational capacity to safely and successfully engage with the AOD LLE workers. This toolkit will include a wide range of tools, templates, job aids and resources, covering many topics that we identified throughout that consultation process, such as recruitment, position descriptions, training and qualifications, organisational support, and importantly, supervision for the lived experience workforce. We see this organisation tool as an important step towards the development of a safe and supported workforce. This toolkit is currently in the design stage at the moment, so we're hoping to be able to deliver the toolkit maybe hopefully in the first quarter of 2024. So hopefully there'll be more news about that as it comes apparent. So now it's almost time for the main event of today's webinar, which is to discuss our frequently avoided questions that we were able to identify throughout our consultation and literature review. But before we moved on to that, I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the extent of our consultation engagement thus far. So to date, our consultations include 42 participants across 19 organisations. We engage in an equal split between organisations such as peak bodies, NGOs and government health services, with over a quarter of our participants being in designated LLE roles. It's also important to mention that we are committed to an ongoing consultation process. Research tells us that AOD education that is co-designed and co-produced in conjunction with people who use or have used alcohol and other drugs is considered best practice. Over to Brett.
Thanks, Matt. I guess if I was going to just quickly talk about this idea of research and consultation, what was really amazing in what we found was this synergy between what the research was telling us from around the world was actually happening on the ground. For once, it all matched up. So wherever we looked, there was evidence, and then we went into the field and we asked people, and they said, well, that's the same experiences we're having. So all through it, it's made our whole pathway a little easier, and we know that some of the things that we're finding is actually being evidenced as well. But as we went along, like Matt said, look, every now and then we've talked with a lot of people about a lot of things around the lived living experience workforce, but occasionally the good questions, or the questions that are a little sticky, tended to come after the meeting or when you're in the elevator going back to the car. And I guess these are the ones that we had to go away and really think about and talk about, because they kept coming up. And some people see them as controversial, and I think there's a part of me that says, oh, there's some things you shouldn't even air in life, these sort of questions. But let's get on with it and have a think about them and think about some of the responses that we found. And all of the material we're going to present today is evidence-based, and we're happy to share those references if people are looking to delve deeper. What do you mean by lived living experience? This is a term that we inherited. Very difficult to go along with LLE and all these acronyms. We're only sort of confusing it. I've seen meetings degrade where we spend half of the meeting talking about what does it mean, lived and living, and I'd like this part of it, and oh, I like the sound of lived, or that living sounds like it's got a lot of problems. This has come up regularly. So, excuse me, I've written some stuff down here. I'm going to try and read from it and try and keep talking at the same time. There is no clear consensus around the language that defines this workforce at the present time, particularly because the variety of unique settings and service approaches that occupy the breadth of this AOD sector that we all work in. It's with a unified workforce in mind that the work we do uses the term lived living to define all workers who bring personal experience of AOD as a requisite of their position. Rather than separating these in distinctly different qualifications, the term LLE should be used as an encompassing term and should not be separated, where workers are defined as belonging to either category. Recognising the diversity that exists in individuals and our relationships with AOD and the nature of these can create real complications when we start labelling people as having either lived or living. The big takeaway is that defining an individual's relationship with AOD by their job title is really problematic and doesn't reflect this dynamic and fluid nature of everyone's relationship with AOD. Lived living was born out of the mental health peer workforce, and it was designed as an encompassing and it was designed to be inclusive and recognising that everyone has a real role to play. But as it's moved into the alcohol and other drug sector, it seems to have turned and has become rather divisive. We've seen other jurisdictions that have now gone ahead and separated the workforce. We know we have harm reduction peer workers and we have recovery peer workers, operating from very different ends of the continuum as we understand it. In Queensland, we don't have a lot of resources as it stands, and whilst we're really grateful for the investment in our positions, we think at the moment, looking at this as a combined workforce is probably the best way of moving forward. AOD LLE workers will each have their own relationship with AOD. For some people, this will mean some form of abstinence. This could be abstaining from your primary drug of concern. Sometimes, abstinence from all psychoactive substances altogether. For others, it may be that they no longer use during the week. Maybe they limit themselves to substance use on special occasions. We're moving into Christmas and New Year, pretty poignant. Perhaps they may limit themselves to drinking lower alcohol options and abstain from all full-strength alcoholic beverages. Others may continue to take a range of prescribed medications, and some may just limit their use to days ending in Y. Regardless of their relationship with AOD, each member of this workforce can bring an authentic and informed approach to complement existing service provision in the AOD sector. Ultimately, organisations will define the qualities of the workforce they wish to engage. But I think we all need to just take a little bit of caution when we're looking at it and think to ourselves, defining someone by their relationship can cause problems. And when we see this lived living, rather than putting a slash, I think if we use a hyphen, it's only a small step to try and say these are terms that we're trying not to separate. Next question. But why? But why do we need this designated AOD lived living experience workforce? We've already got most of our workers all have lived living experience. We already, and they disclose. So why would we want to go about doing this or taking this step? Excuse me, I've written stuff. There's lots of data around this, and we all know the data. There's recent surveys, we can call them. Please feel free to come through, send through what you need. But recent surveys of the AOD sector workforce has revealed that 65% of workers identify as having a lived experience of AOD use, either personally or through significant others' experiences. This has undoubtedly led to better informed service design and delivery, as individuals have been able to apply their lived understandings in their areas of expertise. The introduction of a designated AOD LLE workforce does not challenge the status or the benefits that many workers in the industry have historically been providing. The idea is to complement and provide opportunity for these voices further. The big takeaway is that the personal experiences of AOD workers, whether they disclose or don't choose to disclose, doesn't define their role in the same way as someone who is in a designated lived living experience role, and the attention that attracts. And that attention can sometimes be a bit of a challenge for individuals, but I'm going to bring up here where we'll talk a bit further about the benefits of this. Many allied health professions caution practitioners around disclosure of aspects of the worker's own life, particularly so when those stories are about problematic times in their life. Workers who are hired in these lived living experience peer roles are, by the nature of the role, often required to share their stories, to assist in relationship building, modelling hope and building credibility. This disclosure and the integration of peer roles, where the people who use your service are provided opportunity to engage with others who have the same experienced similar journeys, is what dictates the need to actively include these designated roles. It's the sharing of these stories that creates these bonds that can improve services, that it can improve treatment outcomes. This level of connection and support has been proven to lead to better engagement with the service and better health outcomes for those people, particularly those who traditionally may have struggled in accessing appropriate healthcare. We also know that providing the opportunity for people with lived living experience of alcohol and other drug use to model work behaviours and values can challenge that stereotype that exists around AOD. When we put people up in positions where they can prove that our input is just as valuable as the next person's, and those experiences are worth something, can bring benefit to organisations. I'm just going to get a drink of water here. I'm dry. We know that the WHO still sees illegal substance use dependence as the most stigmatised health condition across the globe. Recent reports also suggest that Queensland, stigma around AOD is widespread and pervasive across heaps of work settings, service delivery areas, including health settings. The integration of a designated workforce is an opportunity for an organisation to actively challenge the stigma that we know exists by demonstrating their commitment to this community and providing clear examples within their organisation of people with lived living experience of alcohol and other drugs making contributions at all levels. It is only by actively championing these roles that we can address this stigma, as keeping employees as covert operatives, providing their lived experience benefits in relative anonymity, has not historically been able to challenge this stigma. So we need to start being open, and we need to start showing the world that the system can be different, and that there's a whole part of this community that's experienced and endured stigma that can provide real benefits. Okay, we've worked through a couple here. I'm going to let Matt take over for a couple. I need water.
making me thirsty just thinking about it. Let's hope I can get through it. All right, so let's keep moving along. So this next question that I have to present on is are AOD LLE workers likely to relapse and therefore take time off and be less reliable? It's an interesting question. But I would like to think that most AOD LLE workers have developed effective strategies that support them to maintain abstinence from problematic substance use or engage in harm reduction techniques to avoid potential harms. Evidence suggests that people with lived experience who are engaged in an active work capacity are less likely to experience problematic substance use that they may have experienced during periods of prolonged unemployment. While this does not guarantee that an AOD LLE worker is not going to change their relationship with drugs whilst employed, similarly, there is no guarantee that existing staff will not experience changes in their AOD use impacting on work performance. Research suggests already a proportion of the existing workforces actively use AOD and that this occasionally sees staff accessing personal leave entitlements. This was backed up throughout our consultation. We were speaking with a senior manager of one organisation, and his comment, I'll just read the comment that he voiced, which was, on occasions, there has been greater incidence with existing staff rather than the AOD peer workers regarding changes in AOD use, resulting in a reduced work performance and accessing leave. We need to consider that all employees, including AOD peer workers, will need to access time off for personal leave because of illness, either for themselves or a family member, or compassionate leave at some stage. Workplace expectations around this should be seen as the same for everyone, regardless of their role or position. We'll move on to the next one, this is one that I do like to talk about a little bit. How long a period of recovery is required to be an effective AOD LLE worker? So everyone will have a different experience and understanding of what recovery can mean. Length of time in recovery is not an indicator of how effective an employee can be in a role and does not directly correlate with the employee's abilities. Contemporary understandings of the concept of recovery acknowledge that abstinence is not necessarily the basis of recovery, with many individuals, as Brett had spoke about before, choosing different relationships with drugs and alcohol and still defining themselves as in recovery. This can mean reducing their use or choosing a different substance, safer using practices or forms of abstinence. Rather than a focus on the worker's time since changing their relationship with AOD, effort should concentrate on assessing the individual's capacity to be effective in their role. While some organisations will require AOD LLE workers to have first-hand experience of certain treatment types and settings, it's important to recognise the unique nature of recovery and that all individuals will have different experiences of this. There are many workers from across the AOD LLE workforce and within our existing AOD workforces who continue to use alcohol and other drugs and still provide effective and valued service contributions within organisations. Okay, this next one's quite an interesting one. So are people on opioid dependence treatment programs, or ODTP, able to work effectively? So ODTP medications are widely recognised as an effective treatment for those with opioid dependence and seen by the World Health Organization as essential medicines. They should not be seen as any different to other prescribed medications in the workplace. Existing workforces will often already be taking prescribed medications for a range of mental health and physical conditions. Organisations will often already have drug and alcohol policies that guide both employees and employers around the use of prescribed medications. Whilst both methadone and buprenorphine can cause some level of impairment early in the treatment, the purpose of these medications is to allow individuals to avoid intense withdrawal symptoms and cravings and to function long-term without impairment. The challenges, let's face it, the challenges that AOD LLE workers face in accessing ODT medications whilst employed have been clearly documented, with many who access community pharmacies often facing restricted opening hours that coincide with their work hours, and the need sometimes to travel to pharmacies that can be located away from their place of employment. Rather than seeing this as insurmountable, these challenges represent an opportunity for employers to support workers with reasonable adjustment around structured breaks, working hours that will facilitate the worker accessing these medications. These adjustments could be seen as consistent with Section 37 of the Queensland Human Rights Act of 2019, which states the right to access health services without discrimination. Okay, here's the big one that I'm really looking forward to is how are AOD LLE peer workers different to mental health peer workers? Okay, now I've, as in my bio there, I've worked as a mental health peer worker for quite a long time. Just happened that I have experience with alcohol and drugs, so I can definitely see the difference in the roles. But what I wanted to talk about is mainly that mental health peer workers and AOD lived living experience workers share similarities in the way they support their clients by sharing their personal experiences in a way, as Brett mentioned earlier, that inspires hope and builds mutual and reciprocal relationships through an understanding of similar experiences. Mental health peer workers provide support focused on recovery-orientated practice. Recovery in mental health has been described as a staged journey involving a series of processes including connectedness, hope and optimism about the future, identity, meaning of life, and empowerment. In the context of Queensland AOD treatment, the term recovery is used to describe any approach that seeks to identify and achieve goals that are meaningful to the client or individual. This may include safer using practices, reducing use or abstinence. For many people, recovery describes a holistic approach that offers greater opportunity for positive engagement with families, friends, and communities. In the AOD field, the principles of recovery include the recognition that there are many different pathways to recovery, and that recovery exists on a continuum of improved health and wellness. AOD LLE workers understand that not all individuals they support will have a recovery goal of abstinence from AOD use, but many may be looking to change their relationship with a substance or multiple substances. AOD peer workers or LLE workers utilise their unique lived experience in many different settings. They may be employed in rehabilitation settings, drawing from their own experiences of recovery and relapse prevention strategies to provide support. And they can be also employed in harm reduction settings, using their sound knowledge of overdose risk and responses, as well as harm reduction strategies to work with people where they are. We recognise, and Brett and I have always recognised, that the mental health peer workforce is a well-developed and supported workforce, and that mental health peer workers have paved the way for the lived experience workforce. Importantly, the workforce successes should be celebrated. There is much that can be learned from these successes and growth of this workforce. Whilst there are similarities, there are added layers of complexity that people working in AOD lived living experience roles experience, such as potential risks around disclosing criminalised activities and the stigma that still exists around people who use alcohol and other drugs. Hand over to Brett for a few now.
Cheers, Matt. Just to all those mental health peer workers out there, I wouldn't say it's all rosy. I know they've had 10 years of getting it right, but we work a lot alongside them a lot, and they would be the first ones to say there's still challenges. And I guess their challenges are the similar challenges as what this workforce is going through in its infancy. So there is a lot to learn. What are we up to? Will the addition... Are AOD LLE workers able to handle the stress of the job? Aren't they going to be too fragile? Everyone in the audience here today, and I'm assuming further afield, will understand that the AOD service delivery can be demanding, can see higher levels, risks of stress and burnout. All this stuff is very, very well documented. In many cases, existing AOD workforces will have a range of support and supervision measures available to them to ensure their sustainability and safety. We're used to it. It's common practice now in this sector. AOD LLE workers also require these support measures, including appropriate supervision and an opportunity for reflection. Across clinical practice, many workforces require professional supervision with a peer from within their field, either to meet registration or membership obligations. Similarly, AOD LLE workforce requires some peer supervision, often external if available, where they can reflect on their practice and around their self-care strategies. I don't even know what's there, but far from being fragile, most AOD LLE workers that I've met inherently will have lived through many challenges in life, often developing a real sense of resilience, understanding the stresses that accompany many service delivery settings, particularly because they've actually been a person moving through them, not just working within. So what is important is ensuring that this workforce has access to specific training, reflective supervision that we know is critical in keeping other areas of the sector safe, and similarly for this living experience workforce. So no, the takeaway is I think they can handle it. Will the addition of an AOD lived living experience workforce make my job more complicated? I'm going to go to my notes. The development of the AOD lived living experience workforce in Australia is still in its infancy, even more so here in Queensland. Several other states are further advanced than us, which sees large gaps in the literature around specific implementation, evaluation, and some of the workforce experiences that we know are associated. This is coming. It took a while for the mental health peer work to catch up with their literature. And so what we have done is occasionally, like I said, the challenges that they've been through, I think we can reflect on and apply to us, particularly around this. So drawing from those experiences suggests that whilst some clinicians had initial concerns around the implementation of a lived experience workforce initially, the overwhelming majority now see the inclusion of this workforce as improving service user outcomes, making their jobs easier and adding value to their work. We can only look at this as a shining light for what it might look in the AOD sector when we can get past this and recognise that the AOD LLE workforce is going to make our jobs easier. It's going to make everyone's services more informed. I think I've written something here. Rather than complicating existing roles, the inclusion of the AOD lived living experience workforce can complement existing services, often enriching the experience within therapeutic groups. They can assist in the comprehension of clinical advice and concepts for people using your service, and similarly assist clinicians in understanding the experiences of those that are using the service. It should be seen as a two-way street. Whilst initially there may be some work integrating these perspectives into multidisciplinary teams, the evidence suggests that this workforce will assist in developing a less complicated, more accessible and engaging service that should see less complications and better health outcomes. I don't want to start talking about insight, but case in point, the role and the opportunity that's happened here at Insight and embedding a lived experience team within what they're doing, it's certainly seeing better outcomes and certainly been embraced. Ooh. But how? But how can we employ this workforce if they have to use the cars? There's some risk around this. There's levels of risk that we are happy to engage with, but that feels like a step too far. We went to the books. Most organisations already have existing workplace policies that apply to everyone, in particular regarding the use of motor vehicles that will provide expectations for employees around the use of these vehicles. If any employee feels that their current substance use might interfere with their ability to operate a company vehicle, then the onus is on them to declare it. Existing vehicle policies should apply across the breadth of your existing workforce equally. Shouldn't be any extra measures that apply specifically to an AOD lived living experience workforce. We have heard some not so nice examples, but well, maybe the random drug tests might not be so random, or maybe there might be breath tests involved. We'd like to see if any of those sort of measures were to be applied specifically to a workforce, then they'd also be applied across the breadth of the existing workforce. The Queensland Government advises that no one should drive or operate machinery after taking illegal drugs. Though also included in this advice is a range of commonly prescribed or over-the-counter medications that can affect your driving. If the integration of the lived living experience workforce into your organisation raises specific concerns around the use of vehicles and the exposure to risk, then organisations can perhaps, and we go back to some of this survey data again, consider the statistics that more than 2/3 of your workforce already identify with having some form of lived experience. 34.5% of all AOD workers suggest they have a personal lived experience of alcohol and other drug use. So I don't see how, if we're going to enact some sort of policy around vehicles or think about vehicles, that the same concerns wouldn't apply to this existing workforce as it stands. This suggests that the integration of an AOD lived living experience workforce presents no further risk around vehicle policies than your existing workforces could be perceived to present. Ideally, all organisations will continue to have open dialogue with all their staff about the inherent concerns that all substance use, both licit and illicit, can present when operating organisational vehicles. That brings us to the end of our questions. There's lots more, and I guess before we just jump to questions, we're really looking forward to getting the organisational toolkit out there. Many of these questions have come from that consultation, but there's so many areas that we're trying to just bring some evidence to about what can be really, really good. That we know that when people think about this and think about the reasons why they include this workforce and they get it right, it can go really, really right. Case in point. We also know, and all of you out there also, have heard the stories that precede us about where people have got it wrong. And I think every time we get it wrong, or parts of the sector get it wrong, we're setting back what is a movement that really should be gaining momentum. And so we're hoping the toolkit might give opportunity for organisations just to have a little think about ways and some of the ideas that might make this sustainable and see them achieve these benefits that we know are so inherent that come with this workforce. Thanks. I'll put you over to Matt and he can field some questions. And we'll back to James, who is our line manager and an ally and a...
You can stay, we can both answer them.
Thank you, Brett and Matt. And thank you everybody in the room here and for those out there who have been engaged in this and for everything that's coming through in the chat. Before I go into the room for questions and then also to those that have been posted online, knowing that these things are always a little bit a big task to come and present, and particularly on topics that you know, are areas of, as you said before, that are new and emerging. but there's some lovely comments here, and I'd just like to read out one, which is, thank you for speaking on this. Feels encouraging and informative. So good feels there. Now, just a couple of questions come through. When I say a couple, a few. So I might go to the room first just to see if there's anybody here. That's all right. Excellent. So a couple of questions. So I'll read the first one here. What are the undisclosed challenges that you've had in this role?
Those challenges.
What I would suggest is that we've been very, very fortunate to come into Insight. We're not in forward-facing roles here. Whilst we work with a lot of people, it's normally about AOD professionals and working with them rather than in a forward-facing role. Our challenges, therefore, have been rather lessened. We've come into an organisation of allies. Our multidisciplinary team has been accepting with open arms. I don't have to go very far to go and find stories about where that's not the case. And we know that sometimes this integration is presenting these challenges, and there is concerns. And so we've been very fortunate. As for disclosing, I normally talk about everything, so I don't.
Good. Thank you.
I think that's probably one of the big things about lived experience roles is, a lot of people do have that power of disclosing as I was saying before, I've disclosed about so many things within my life to people, and I think that's what we're trying to encourage is the power of that disclosure. I think as Brett just said, I don't think there's much that we're not willing to talk about within ourselves if it's used for the right purpose, being education of others or helping people to change their mind towards the workforce. So I don't know if that answers the question. That's just how I feel about it. Yeah.
Thank you. There's some very deep questions here. So why do you think taboo subjects those conversations are happening in the lifts and not at the tables? What are people afraid of?
I think most of the time these sort of questions that we get, it seems to be in that relaxed environment, as Brett was saying, like in an elevator or in a car park after the meeting. And maybe it is that people feel that, in a room where there's managers and executives in the room, they may not want to talk about these same sort of things. But we've often found that the good stuff does tend to happen when it's a bit more of a relaxed environment and people are, feeling a bit more comfortable talking to someone, especially like Brett and myself, who, again, we just start honest conversations. And I guess that's what it's really about. And if we can have more of those honest conversations at a higher level within organisations, I think we could see change.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We don't need to tiptoe around this stuff. That's I'm in all agreement. Why these conversations happen like this? It's because people still see it as still a bit PC and still a bit tiptoeing around it and don't want to say the wrong thing. And what I'd encourage everybody is that, please, we're not fragile.
Thank you. Now, I'll just probably break this one down a little bit. So what complications do you think AOD LLE workers might experience around re-traumatization with disclosure and accumulated moral systemic injury without effective reasonable adjustments for risk of psychosocial hazards being addressed? So, and I know you mentioned supervision before,
I wish we had a time machine. I wish we could just put things on hold and give us 12 months to actually talk about the specific training that's required. We know that disclosure around AOD has further layer of complexity. The fact it's still criminal, the fact the stigma still rides over. Having purposeful disclosure, and there is opportunity, and there is some organisations interstate that are looking at this as training, but given the opportunity, it's well forecasted in our future plan to look at an e-learning around disclosure and around purposeful disclosure and the inherent risks that come with that of re-traumatizing from an interview level when you first go in for a position through to when you might advocate or be in environments like this or asked to present, where we'd love to get it done and have it released now, but there's a lot of work involved in it, and I guess we're keen to get it done. Supervision, like you suggested, James, I guess you might be able to talk about.
Yeah, and I guess, I think that's probably one of the big important things I think that we need to point out, especially in this organisational tool, is that when organisations employ AOD peer workers or lived experience workers, is having everything in place. So it doesn't have to always be just supervision. It could be debriefings. It could be supports that they can go to from like a peer perspective. Like could be other peer workers. Like we often talk about incidences where there's been one peer worker in an organisation. That can be really hard because that person doesn't have anybody to connect with. So it's always better to have at least two, because peer workers will be able to connect with each other. And so that's one thing that we point out a lot, and we talk about that not one outing, because I think there's a lot of strength. And myself working as a peer worker, I've had incidences where I've been traumatised or triggered or something like that, working with people, and having someone else to talk to has helped me. So I haven't had to wait to a supervision, or I haven't had to wait for an organised debriefing. It's just a conversation that I can have with someone who understands what I'm going through and may be able to connect with what I'm saying. So I think that having allies within the workforce, particularly around lived experience, makes a big difference for an organisation.
Thank you for that. And I know you mentioned it, but certainly from my understanding through your research, this is where a lot of this education and training is also about to the existing workforce to prepare the ground. Absolutely. For helping to try and minimise, I guess, some of these risks of things like the psychosocial hazards that can occur. I better move on because there's a few to get through here. One that I know that will be dear to your heart. Currently at the moment, the only training is the mental health Cert 4 in mental health peer work, and there isn't an AOD equivalent. Do you recommend having the mental health peer work qualification anyway?
I've done the mental health AOD Cert 4, the Cert 4, mental health peer work. I guess it all depends on. I know that there is a Cert 4 in alcohol and drug. I know that through our research, it's not really offered in Brisbane. You have to go up north to do it, from what I believe. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I mean, it's very limited anyway, the content of alcohol and drug in the existing Cert 4. But what I've often spoke about with people is if you're looking to get into the industry, it is good to have that qualification because most organisations will want you to have that formalised approach. But things like Insight, we've got lots of alcohol and drug training, e-learnings and things like that. And myself, working as a peer worker, I invested a lot of time in doing a lot of the modules through Insight and learnt a lot about alcohol and drugs and ways to support people through that. And some of the work that Brett and I hope to do eventually will definitely be able to support that lived experience workforce. That's in the future. We can't really talk about it right now. But if given the scope, we would love to be able to create and design some really good sort of resources and training for peer workers and lived experience workers that haven't had the opportunity to do those sorts of formalised trainings with Cert 4.
Yeah, I concur. Look, we meet lots of people who have done the Cert 4 and we hear varied reports. I think it gives a good basis. There's also intentional peer support. There's a range of models that are out there. I think it's really important to think about what role you are looking to fill, what responsibilities that person might have, and what training will best support them. But certainly from the previous question, some training around disclosure and boundaries and self-care. And then if you're in a peer role, that idea of understanding mutuality and how do we go through purposeful disclosure, really important. Just as important as a range of other training that you could go and engage in small parts.
Thank you for that. And I guess this possibly is a question and an answer in one. It's about, I think it came up around when we were talking about the cars, because as the writer comments here, it's a ridiculous question and it seems a bit discriminatory. answer, yes. So, we have policies across our workforces to deal with these types of issues, and the same applies for any employee of any organisation. That's probably me speaking from a line manager point of view. So what's the difference between an AOD LLE worker and a regular AOD worker who finishes a bottle of vodka over the weekend? I think that's a simple answer too.
Look, probably the same sort of people, probably got the same understandings, but it's about the role and that role as being outwardly facing, defined by that use, changes the nature of the engagement with the people who use your service, and even more importantly, to the wider community. An organisation can model that they believe in people with lived living experience and create counter stereotypes that can start to change this.
Thank you. And I'm just flagging now at the moment that we may or may not be able to get through the rest of the questions and comments coming through, but we'll certainly try our best. So thank you everyone for hanging in there, and thank you Matt and Brett for staying with us for this. Some articles and role descriptions use the term peer worker. Is there any difference to LLE, and what term would you recommend?
This is interesting. He loves this one.
A peer, the word peer, and a peer invokes a sense of mutuality and sharing, and we know we have peer work roles in settings where it's about engagement. But what we've got to not forget is lived living experience is not just about forward-facing peer roles. I'm here today as an AOD lived experience educator. We work with people who are line managers, who are CEOs, executive management, sits on board, sitting members on advisory councils and boards of management. This is bringing lived living experience of alcohol and other drug into the workforce. Peers, wonderful, where I identify myself as a peer, but I don't work as a peer. I think it defines the nature of the engagement in the role, is maybe, especially if it's in a position description.
Great, thank you. Question about career pathways and progression. What career pathways or progression can be established for individuals with lived and living experience in the AOD workforce, acknowledging that not everybody maybe wants to sort of do the vertical progression up to being a team leader or something like that?
And I guess progression is more centered around, what the person's looking for. As you said, like some people may just want to, work as a peer worker or in a community setting or on an inpatient ward or something like that. So there is, definitely the scope of pathways is immense. Like it just depends on what the person really wants to do. There's no onus when you start as a peer role that you're going to be a team leader or that you're going to move up through the ranks. Some people do, but I think it's all about finding a starting point for that individual. That's probably the most important thing. There is definitely more growth and more positions becoming available within, especially within like things like Queensland Health and obviously a lot of the NGOs. There's always different positions being created. It's just, I guess my encouragement would be if someone's looking to get into this field is just to apply for jobs and just to sort of get amongst it really, because there's a lot of different roles that are becoming available. So I don't know if that answers that question, but it's, there's no real specific answer to that one. I mean, as we said before with the Cert 4, you could do a Cert 4 or you could do intentional peer support, all these different trainings. But that's really going to get you as a foot into the door, and that's it. From there, it's up to the individual as to where they go within their career.
Good, thank you. Lots of good comments here, which hopefully we'll be able to capture for you. I'd like to just move through a few more questions in the remaining time that we've got. And there's one that I might just answer here because it's about the conversations and any helpful advice to have conversations about what will happen if somebody cannot drive a car. Cars keep coming up, particularly if the need to drive is an inherent requirement of the role. I guess we're talking there about any type of workplace where managers have a responsibility for being proactively managing work performance and the conduct of any employee, and any manager would be required to take appropriate action to make things safe for any employee, living experience or otherwise, in relation to being able to respond to any immediate concerns around risk or health or safety for any person involved. So I would suggest that and I can't speak to the writer here about the circumstances, the situations, but these things would be covered in current HR policies for the majority of organisations. Look, I do think we're running out of time, so I might just end with this one. Where do you see the LLE workforce in 5 to 10 years?
Wow. That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, there is a lot of growth at the moment within the workforce, and we're seeing a lot of new positions being created. But, you know, at the risk, I don't want to sound negative, but a lot of the roles are definitely in the mental health field. And so what we would really love to ideally see is a lot more positions being created within the AOD, lived experience workforce. And so it's just about like the things that we're doing, the training we're creating, and all these sorts of things to sort of normalise what the benefits, I guess, and the settings that we can work in as AOD lived experience workers. I hope that over time we can build on that just through educating people of the benefits and what we can actually do and how effective we are as workers.
I wouldn't say it's a perfect world yet, but we know that the mental health sector has challenged stigma, and while stigma still really does prevail around mental health, there's been great leaps in that area. In 5 to 10 years, I'd like to see that mirrored around substance use. That would be my hope.